Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have another double header, and unfortunately, as much as I hate to do this on back-to-back videos, I feel like I have to because part of my channel is about documenting what's happening in the fragrance world, and we actually lost two fragrance icons within the last couple weeks. Alessandro Brun, who was the co-founder of Masque Milano, I did a rest in peace video for him yesterday. You know, these people, in my opinion, deserve to be celebrated, and I want my channel to be a little bit of an archive. You know, that's one of the reasons I work so hard to review so many fragrances, is I want people to be able to go to my channel and find a list of reviews and get my thoughts on a particular house or fragrance or perfumer or time period or whatever it is, right? And so part of documenting and having a little bit of an archive is discussing when important people in the fragrance industry pass away. And Alessandro Brun started a niche house, you know, a little over a decade ago. And, you know, he was a co-founder of Masque Milano. That's obviously a big deal. But about a week after he passed away, we lost an icon in fashion. And that was Claude Montana. So today, in honor of Claude Montana's life, we are going to review Graphite, which I think is one of the finest cheapies money can buy. A lot of people sometimes give me a hard time for reviewing very expensive, hard to find fragrances. For example, I reviewed this $4,300 Amafi within the last couple weeks. If you want to laugh, check that video out. I've reviewed lots of Ensar ouds that go for expensive money and stuff like that. But I also like to review these cheaper fragrances from time to time. And Graphite was created in 2011. It is not my favorite Claude Montana fragrance. My favorite of all time is from the late 80s, and it is this little bad boy right here called Montana Parfum Dome from 1989. I have multiple bottles. The reason I did not review this one today is because the different bottles smell different to me. So I'm thinking about maybe doing a little bit of a comparison video. I have a vintage sort of tester demonstration bottle of Parfum Dome. This one smells a little bit different from this right here, which is a larger vintage bottle that was distributed under Selective Beauty. You can see the sprayer right there. And I've got a version that was actually distributed by Empire of Scents, which is the same distributor as this. So this is probably within the last 15 years or so. And you can see the sprayer has changed. And this smells very different from the vintage. So I'm thinking about doing a comparison. I also have a little mini, which kind of opens up like that, and you can see the Montana Parfum Dome juice inside. So I will review this bad boy, but maybe it'll be more of a comparison video between the vintage and the more modern stock. But I do think Parfum Dome, which is unfortunately discontinued, is his best work. There's no doubt about that in the perfume world. That came out in '89. That is much more to my personal taste. But this is a easier fragrance for me to review. And so this video is going to be kind of a two-parter. It's going to be a review of Graphite, which I consider one of the finest cheapies money can buy. And it's going to be kind of a celebration of Claude Montana's life. So some information on him. And if you're not familiar with Claude Montana, he became very popular in the late 70s and early 80s for the heavy woman shoulder pad look. That was one of his claims to fame. The other claim to fame was his leather tailoring skills. He loved kind of the high shoulders and looked like women wearing armor with leather and the high shoulder pads. And he was a daring sort of designer, if you will. But he had a very rough upbringing, from my understanding. He, it says, and this is according to a Guardian obituary. You can check out the full article on the Guardian. There's some other news outlets that sort of did a breakdown of his life, but just some quick talking points. Apparently, he left his Parisian home for London and lived by selling basically like penury or avoided penury by baking bracelets, which is crazy, and selling them. Basically made the bracelets from paper mache, toilet paper, and glue and rhinestones, and literally sold them on the street to survive in the early 70s. He was ejected from the UK for a lack of a work permit, and he ended up drifting to Paris, is the story, where of course his designer career ended up taking off. In 1977, for the very first time, he staged his own work, and 2 years later, he put on his very first formal show in Paris. And so there were big names that were very interested in his work. He was, moving in circles with people like Thierry Mugler, and they really dominated the ready-to-wear space. Stars like Grace Jones, Diana Ross, Cher, Barbara Streisand all loved and wore his work because he was a little bit different than, what was popular at the time. And one thing about Claude Montana is he struggled with addiction. So there were times where he would work for 2 weeks straight, and then you wouldn't see him for 2 weeks, was kind of the rumor. But his customers in the 1980s and the style that he ended up putting forward that really took off was a huge name. So much so that the rumor is that when Arnault, the guy that owns LVMH still, I believe to this day, took over the company in the 80s, he wanted to hire Claude Montana as a creative director for Dior. And he basically turned it down because he didn't see the job as prestigious enough. And so he took a job with Lanvin at the time. And I think that that was, I wouldn't call it a mistake, but he saw Lanvin more as a house that fit the style and aesthetic that he kind of wanted to go towards, if that makes sense. So he was a sort of character that had a big dichotomy in his personality. On one side, he was almost that, genius savant who felt like he could do anything with the snap of a finger, but sometimes he couldn't figure out how to pay for his own coffee. You've all known people like that, right? They've got the buttons all wrong on their shirts. Think about the Einstein kind of guy. But he was a genius as far as artistically goes, creating haute couture, his fashion influenced many in the industry for an entire decade, but then he would occasionally disappear for days or weeks without explanation. And they understood that he had basically an addiction to partying and drugs is really what it came down to. He also had personal problems with his parents, so much so there was such a hard break where he changed his name. The original name for his family name was not Montana. It was actually Montemat. And because he claimed Montemat was difficult to pronounce, he changed it to Montana. But the rumor was that he also changed it because he wanted a little bit of a break from his German mother. I don't know if his father was also German or not, but I know that it was a very strained relationship. He thought of them as bourgeoisie, and he basically fled them from a very young age. And his sister was a big part of his life, according to the obituary that I read, and she actually helped run his business for a little while there and did PR in his business. But you can kind of see that he lived sort of a two-part life. On one hand, he was seen as one of the biggest name in the Paris and just worldwide fashion scene for a long time. For his styles influenced almost an entire decade of fashion and high culture. But on the other side, even as he aged, you saw this. He kind of lived a little bit as a recluse. Many people did not see him here lately in his life. He died, I believe, at 76 years old. And he just died here at the end of February. So just a couple weeks ago, they literally just had the funeral in Paris. So there were some big names that spoke. For example, Jean-Charles de Castelbajac, which I've reviewed one of his stuff. I have another Jean-Charles de Castelbajac review coming up very soon. And so there were, I think they were saying that there were some other high-profile names that spoke at his funeral. I can't remember exactly who, but check out some of his designs. Like if you're bored, look up some of Claude Montana's designs. They are very, very interesting with the leather and the high shoulders. And there's some some of them are funny looking at them, but I'm sure stylistically, like the one from '85. The huge shouldered shirt, women wearing almost what looks like a pinstripe suit and the biggest bow on her head you could ever imagine. I mean, the bow on her head's like this big, right? She wouldn't fit through a doorway with that bow on her head. But this is a celebration of his life. And he was a, you know, like I said, he was a person that had a really split in his personality. And he obviously struggled with addiction, and he struggled with the day-to-day life sometimes. But he seemed to be on the back end one of those, almost you would call it like a, I hate to say idiot savant, but like a savant that struggled with day-to-day life. We all know people like that. But in his field, he was an absolute genius, and his life deserves to be celebrated. I haven't seen very many people discussing Claude Montana, or at least not in FragCom. I know Claude Montana's fragrances went through some rough patches. Well, the house in general, I think, went through bankruptcy. I know that really affected him as well. It may have even gone through multiple bankruptcies. I can't remember exactly. But so he dealt with a lot of issues where once the 80s ended, it really felt like, you know, after his final tour at Lanvin, and Lanvin, I think, basically asked him not to come back, from my understanding of the story. Again, I'm a fragrance guy. I'm not a high fashion guy or anything like that. So if I'm getting parts of this story wrong, please leave it in the comments. But from my understanding, it was almost like when a team lets a player play out his contract and says, hey, we appreciate your service, but please go away. That's kind of what Lanvin did to Claude Montana. And I think he just kind of went into a downward spiral. And I think he struggled with the bankruptcy of his house and all that good stuff. But his fragrances, some of his fragrances are absolutely amazing. And so let's talk about one of them. Let's do the review of Graphite. So Graphite came out in 2011, and Nathalie Lorson is the perfumer. Now, if you know anything about Nathalie Lorson, you know that she is one of my favorite perfumers. And many people will preface that by saying, well, she's one of my favorite budget perfumers, or she's the queen of budget fragrances, or stuff like that. She is one of my favorite perfumers, period. That's it. There's no but extra that I need to add on to the end of that sentence. She is one of my favorite perfumers, and she created this in 2011. And some folks say that there are different versions of this. This is the only bottle I've ever smelled, but I have seen some Graphite bottles where, I don't know if this is like painted in, looks like silver graphite here, or if the leather is different on certain bottles. I have no clue. All I know is that I paid about 30 bucks for this 100 ml bottle. So value for money is through the roof as far as I'm concerned. And Nathalie Lorson makes these type of fragrances. So, you know, she creates these cheapies that, while I don't think anything is a must buy, some people gave me a hard time early on in my YouTube journey, because I would say, oh, this is a must buy. And they say, nothing is a must buy. Ah! Well, it's a must sniff. Let's put it that way. I think her work is a must sniff. And actually, I'm going to do a fresh spray, because one of the downfalls of this fragrance is longevity and projection, which I usually don't complain about, but I will here on this one. Well, not complain, but it needs to be mentioned. So if you know anything about her fragrances, they are kind of standouts for me, the cheapies. And many of her fragrances made my cheapie list. I've done it. This is not a top 10 cheapie. You can check it out. There are some reviews coming of some of her cheapie fragrances, but Nathalie Lorson, I think, is best known for creating these cheaper fragrances that almost like check the box, all right? So it's almost like a reference, in this case, Vetiver with Encre Noire. Or in my opinion, I think she did something very similar with what she did with Encre Noire, where it's a reference Vetiver. It's very cheap. It sort of competes with the higher end versions of a particular note. She did something very similar with This Is Him by Zadig and Voltaire. And I know Aurélien Guichard was involved in this particular release as well, but I credit Nathalie Lorson for the majority of This Is Him, because I can smell her DNA, her type of work in this. There's a lot. If you know Nathalie Lorson's work, you'll pick it out. You'll pick out a lot of her style creation in This Is Him. And this is kind of the Encre Noire version for frankincense, in my opinion. And I'm going to review both of these. Both of these are going to get a full review on the channel very soon. But the reason I mentioned those is because Graphite, to me, the easiest way to sort of describe Graphite, okay, is just like Encre Noire is the standout for Vetiver, and This Is Him is kind of her reference frankincense. This is sort of her wood fragrance. If you're a fan of woody, heavy, dominant fragrances, if you're a fan of traditionally masculine, woody fragrances, I think this is a must sniff, okay? Like I said, nothing's a must buy, but at 30 bucks, how mad can you be? I mean, shit, I think I spent more than that on lunch today, right? So, for 30 bucks, you know, this is a must sniff cheapie in my opinion. And basically what you get is this mixture of cedar, cedar leaf, gaiac wood, which adds a little bit of smokiness. There's like a smoky barbecued element to gaiac wood, and sandalwood, all right? And obviously at $30, you're not going to get vintage Mysore sandalwood from 1984 where they only use the heartwood of the tree. Obviously, this is a synthetic composition. Many perfumes nowadays are quote-unquote synthetic, okay? But she has a knack. She has a kind of ability to create a synthetic fragrance where you know it's synthetic, and yet it smells so beautiful. And I'm not saying it smells natural necessarily, although I think the woody elements do smell natural in this. I think the violet leaf smells very natural, although I've smelled real violet leaf and it doesn't smell like the violet leaf that you get in many of these fragrances, but I think it's very well done. And I think the frankincense smells high quality. I think that she's done a good job with a quote-unquote synthetic composition, all right? So when you first spray, you're going to notice a couple things right from the get-go. Obviously, you're going to get hit with that cedar, okay? The cedar is the star of the show, and the cedar is sort of the... You're going to get that pencil shavings, eraser, you know, take you back to writing with pencils, which most people don't do once they get older. But, you know, this is actually a my first pencil for my daughter, but it was around, so I grabbed it just as to make a point here. And you're going to get it mixed instantly when you first spray. It's going to mix with this very contemporary violet leaf, okay? So it doesn't bring to mind, the violet leaf here to me does not bring to mind something like Fahrenheit with that gasoline, petrol, diesel, barrel note, whatever you want to call it. Somehow what she's done is she's made the violet leaf here stand out in a way. That violet leaf does give you a little bit of this ozonic, maybe just the tiniest bit of petrol, diesel, the tiniest bit, okay? But mostly what I get is I get this very smooth, almost creamy softness, all right? And that creamy softness kind of puts everything into perspective, because if you know, or have seen real graphite, and if you just Google some images of graphite, you'll see exactly where I'm going with this. But some graphite has this jagged, menacing, sharp look to it, okay? If you just look at a picture of graphite, depending on the size of the graphite, sometimes it can look like it's jagged and sharp, like the edge of a cliff or something like that, right? But actually, the reality is, actual graphite is brittle, and it's actually very soft. You know, think about writing with a pencil, right? And you get that soft graphite. And that's kind of the way that the violet leaf feels. It's kind of the way that it appears to my nose, all right? There's a softness, there's a gentleness to the opening. Where you would expect it to be harsh and challenging, it's not. The woody notes are prominent immediately. I mean, you're going to pick up those woody elements. And if you get that the violet leaf is kind of softened, think of it as being softened by layers, all right? So if you look at actual graphite, the fragrance wears as if you're literally watching Nathalie Lorson build this fragrance layer by layer. And if you look at graphite, it looks like it's made up of a lot of different layers, all right? It almost looks like, I mean, the best way to describe it is literally like you're looking at a cross-section of, you know, like a rock or something, and you can see the layers of each rock making up the whole. That's the way that graphite looks if you look at it up close. And it's actually a great description for the fragrance as well, because it literally feels like you're watching Nathalie Lorson build this fragrance while you're wearing it. That's the way that it wears on my skin anyways. And the star of the show is obviously the cedar. She allows the cedar to shine while giving bits and pieces here and there. So there's cedar leaf, which gives it a little bit of a green aspect to it. And there's her signature black pepper right there in the top. And along with that cedar, or probably the cedar accord, just in general that you're smelling, is made up of some sort of blast of isoe super. That would be my guess, okay? is that there's probably huge amounts of ISOE Super in here, along with other cedar-like elements. I don't think cedar is necessarily an expensive ingredient, but I'm sure to build that accord, she used multiple things. And what's interesting is ISOE Super can sometimes feel harsh on the nose, right? It's one of the reasons why some folks don't like ISOE Super, is it can sometimes feel harsh and sharp and, you know, like some of the graphite minerals might look, like I was describing earlier. But here it's smooth, like writing with the tip of the pencil, like I showed earlier. And it's smooth enough, and it's almost like, you know what it feels like? It feels like when you write with one side of the pencil enough to where that side gets soft. And if you write on any other side, it doesn't feel like it's you're writing with as thick of the side of the pencil, right? The other side almost feels more jagged because you've softened up that one side. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. And so that is kind of the way that the fragrance wears. It just has that smoothness to it. It's almost like the wood feels softened with iris or powder or something like that. But it's not a powdery fragrance overall because the wood dominates so strong. But where you would expect sharper, heavier bits to come in and poke you, where you would expect to get poked with the jagged edges of the graphite, let's say, the violet leaf, the smoke, the gaiac wood. There's also notes of leathery notes, which I don't really get too much, and ambergris, which I don't get too much as well, and geranium, which I think just adds a little bit of that floral aspect. Sometimes geranium can imitate this rosy, slightly spicy rose aspect. Here, I think it adds to the green touches because as the fragrance dries down, you do get this resinous, almost like green bit that comes and goes periodically, all right? So I don't want you to think that this smells like iris, but I do want you to take that image of the softness of iris, the powderiness of iris, and maybe tampering down or using layers to tamper down some of the elements that you would expect to be harsher, right? So it's almost executed in a vintage fragrance style, but the execution is very contemporary and modern, if that makes sense. And that's why I say I think it's a great cheapie. I wore it to work today. It's fantastic for what it is. And like I said earlier, normally I don't discuss projection, sillage, longevity, all that shit, because I'm of the mind that you just reapply, right? If you're not happy with it, just spray away. Especially when you have a lot of fragrances in your collection. Many people, you know, they'll do like 1 spray, 2 sprays, spray more, you know, if you have a problem with that. But this one, no matter how much you spray, I always get 4 to 5 hours, constantly. 4 to 5 hours is sort of about the time where I am ready to reapply. And that's exactly what I will do. I will just reapply this. But no matter how much you reapply, even if you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 4 to 5 hours, you'll be ready to reapply again. That is definitely the biggest knock on this fragrance. Now, the hard part about making that statement is that ISOE Super is notorious for sort of making people go nose blind, okay? It just is. And so maybe I would not be able to smell it after 4 or 5 hours and I'm ready to reapply, but that doesn't mean if I wore it to work and I didn't bring my bottle with me, that others would not be able to smell it as well. It's definitely possible that others are still smelling the fragrance and I've just gone nose blind to it. ISOE Super is notorious for doing that to you. So as the fragrance dries down, I really think that's where you start to pick up even more of the Nathalie Lorson blueprint. If you know her DNA from some of these other fragrances or just other work in general, she's done some amazing stuff. She did Bentley for Men Intense, which I don't have pulled out. She did all of the Encre Noire flankers, Sport, Al Extreme, although I think there's a new one called Indigo, which I have not smelled yet. So she's done some unbelievable work. I'm a huge fan of Nathalie Lorson's work. And so if you know some of her work, you know that she definitely has a signature about what she likes to use. And she loves using this peppery top, especially black pepper. You see black pepper in many of her releases, and frankincense. She loves using black pepper, frankincense, and cashmeran. And now, actually, that I'm saying it, it very well may be cashmeran that I'm smelling that gives it that softness, Cashmeran can sometimes give it a musky softness. She loves using musks in the base as well. There's no musk listed here. There is a little bit of benzoin. And I think the warmth of benzoin is beautiful in the base because benzoin adds a little bit of warmth, a little bit of ambery warmth. And maybe that's where the resinous side of the fragrance comes in. It very well may be the benzoin in the base. It's spicy from the black pepper in the top, okay? But then maybe it's that cashmeran that's kind of softening everything up. I don't know if there's cashmeran in here. I'm just speculating, but I'm giving you an idea of kind of the way that the fragrance wears. So you get an idea. Lots of cedar, lots of isoe super, that peppery spark in the top with that violet leaf, which is much softer than you would expect it to be. You still get elements of the violet leaf, but it's softer, it's toned down because of the layers in the graphite, right? Imagine it just tampering everything down. Imagine Nathalie Lorson literally building this fragrance on your skin as you're wearing it. And along with that, you get the Gaiac wood, which makes it slightly smoky. You get the, well, they say leathery notes and ambergris, which honestly I don't get very much of, but maybe it's just part of the blend. And then you get this green little detail that begins to emerge into the dry down. So it's not like you're just smelling the cedar. It's also like you're smelling the leaf on the tree itself. So you're getting the cedar and you're getting the leaf that's sitting on the tree as well. So you're getting the wood of the tree, the leaves of the tree, and even into the dry down, the oak moss that's growing on the tree, or cedar moss if you so wish. So you're getting bits and pieces of the entire environment. And along with that, you get a little bit of the touch of the resinous benzoin. You get this beautiful sandalwood, which for a synthetic sandalwood, I don't know what's used here, whether it's Javanol or some other sandalwood substitute, but whatever it is, I think it works perfectly for this type of release. And you get a little bit of smokiness, right? And you get smokiness in larger amounts in something like This Is Him, but that frankincense, you can definitely feel the DNA. This is a fragrance that I think is true to her style of creating fragrances. And I could easily see this going for 100 or more. You know, it doesn't have the disgusting bubblegum sweetness that many modern releases do. I think this would easily appeal to someone that has a slightly vintage taste. So if when I held up the Fahrenheit bottle, you're like, wait a minute, that's a 1990s version, or you probably can't tell it's a 90s version, but you could tell it's an older bottle from the Christian Dior there instead of just Dior. And you notice that, and that's your thing. You like older fragrances, you like vintage fragrances. Her work is actually pretty, it's pretty vintage in style, but executed in a contemporary way. And that's why I like her work. I don't think, you know, there are some people who may not be blown away by this. Although I will say, I've talked about this in other videos. I've talked about graphite in other videos, and I got multiple responses that were like, hey, I bought it, it's amazing. One guy was like, I bought one bottle and then it was so cheap I went and bought 3 more as soon as I smelled it, because I don't want to be without it, especially if it gets discontinued and prices go crazy. They say it is still in production, but many of the Montanas that I own, like Comore, which I actually reviewed on the channel, thanks to Keith, sent me a very generous decant. I wore it, loved it, bought a bottle, but this is discontinued. My favorite Parfum Dome is discontinued, so I would not be surprised if at some point this is on the chopping block. I assume, since there's so many bottles out there for 30 bucks, that people are not clamoring to buy graphite at retail. Whatever retail is, I have no clue. But I think that if you are a fan of Nathalie Lorson's work, I would not be surprised, let's just say, I would not be surprised if Montana's Graphite, yeah, I mean, Fragrance Net has it for $25 right now. So as far as cheapies go, I don't know if you're going to be able to do much better than that, in my opinion. I mean, it's just the way that it is. There's a very interesting article on Fragrantica that's titled "Claude Montana Passes Away, but His Memorable Perfumes Survive," which I love. That's basically the exact thing I'm trying to portray during this sort of dual rest in peace video and also review of graphite. in the article they mentioned that Claude Montana got the name King of the Quilt, and he stood out for his mastery of leather, I guess because he was known for sharp silhouettes, King of the Quilt. And he loved using heavy color like bright fuchsia pop, leather suit, something like that. And so I would urge you to check out that article if you're interested in learning more. But I hate the fact that I'm doing back-to-back rest in peace videos. It seems like nowadays people are just my observation. Maybe it's just complete happenstance, but it feels like many people are dying successively. Like there's a lot of things going on, but that's part of life, I guess. There's a season for everything. There's a season for birth, there's a season for love, there's a season for marriage, there's a season for sadness, and there's a season for death. So, but I'm sure that he would not want us to be sad. He'd want us to celebrate his life. And I hope whatever demons that he struggled with throughout his life, that towards the end he was able to come to terms with them. And he was proud of what he left behind. Because like I talked about yesterday during Alessandro Brune's Rest in Peace video, and he was taken even younger. He was in his 50s, I think. And at least Claude Montana was 76 years old. I believe he was 76. He was 76. Yes, he was 76. So he died February 24th, by the way. And so at least he got to live a little bit more of his life. There is a women's Montana Parfum that I would love to add to the collection. I'd love to add a vintage of that to the collection one day. That's my kind of fragrance from the looks of it, but I haven't smelled it. I heard that it was composed by Aurélien Guichard's father, who worked with Nathalie Lorson on this, Jean Guichard, and then reformulated by Edward Fleischier using synthetic castoreum. So I'd be very interested to sniff that. And also Parfum de Peau from '86. So lots of Montanas that I have not smelled, but there will be some more Montana reviews like I talked about, especially the big one, my favorite, Parfum d'Homme. So let me know what you think of Claude Montana. Let me know what you think of his style if you're into fashion. A lot of times with these designers, it's almost like I have to look them up to kind of see, what they were, because I'm not really into fashion. I'm more into the fragrances side of things. But, let me know what you think if you're familiar with Claude Montana's work, his life, his legacy, what he leaves behind. These videos are, like I said, sort of a marker. So somebody coming down the road who is maybe unfamiliar with his work is going through my old videos can see and maybe research about and learn about Claude Montana, the man and the brand and what he created and what he left behind. So rest in peace, Claude Montana. It's literally 10:30 at night. I worked all day. So I'm doing this for you guys and also for for Fragcom in general. I love making these videos, but really to honor Claude Montana. So rest in peace, Claude. Thanks to everybody for being here and watching these and interacting. I love the back and forth in the comments. So cheers, and we'll get back to a regular routine tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.